Their success speaks for itself. With a roster of more than 1,000 attorneys and 100 offices across the country, retaining them is like deploying a battalion to fight your battle. This team battles fiercely to ensure clients receive the compensation they are owed. Law firms are not created equal. Pick the wrong representation, and you might lose before the fight even begins. If you find yourself injured, give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their services are free unless you win. For more details, you can visit forthepeople.com. You can also hit the link below or scan the on-screen QR code. So, where should detectives focus their search for Nancy Guthrie right now? It seems authorities are not focusing much attention about 90 minutes south of Nancy's Tucson home, specifically across the border in Mexico. I would like to share a press release issued today by the lead prosecutor in the Mexican state of Sonora, which sits directly adjacent to Arizona. Here is their statement. Regarding reports suggesting the FBI asked Mexican officials to help locate Nancy Guthrie, or rumors hinting she might be present inside the country. The Sonora Attorney General's office reports that to date they have received no official requests for cooperation or data sharing from any American or Mexican federal agencies regarding this matter. However, FBI insiders told CBS News they have communicated with Mexican counterparts. Meanwhile, Fox News reports a Mexican embassy spokesperson claims there is no proof Nancy was ever taken into their territory. At this stage, it seems a massive portion of the investigation depends on a DNA sample recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's residence. We are aware that this genetic material, whatever the specific source may be, does not belong to Nancy, though police have not clarified the sample type. Authorities stated it is not from her relatives, and they claim it does not belong to her inner circle, though they have not specified who exactly is excluded. It also remains uncertain if this DNA matches the masked individual filmed on her porch around the time she was taken on February 1st. We have learned the profile did not trigger a match in the national database, so we are waiting to see if advanced techniques like forensic genealogy can provide a breakthrough. We will discuss this further with death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan shortly. During our chat, I asked Joseph specifically about the bloodstains discovered on Nancy Guthrie's front steps. The sheriff confirmed that blood belongs to Nancy. I asked Joseph, given his extensive experience in coroner's offices, what details he notices that a layperson might completely overlook. Here is the footage of those stains, captured by Brian Enton of News Nation right at the start of the probe, after deputies released the crime scene at Nancy's house. Recall that the department faced criticism for unsealing the location so quickly. When I first viewed the clip, and credit to my friend Brian, as I believe he filmed it, I noticed something immediately. Right, and again, you have to ask, how on earth did Brian get access to that? I am not criticizing him. He is a journalist doing his work. But why was access allowed? Oh, right, I forgot you took the barrier tape down. It was completely open. Yes, it was. Just let that fact sink in for a moment, okay? Brian is simply performing his job. Some folks have cast doubt on him, asking what he was doing there. I will tell you, he is being a professional journalist. The authorities had already removed the tape. So when he took these shots, it is not like he sent them to me privately. They were published as part of his report. When I looked at the freeze frames, my first thought was, this is expirated blood. Let me explain what I mean by that, and do not just take my word for it. Go research it yourself for your own knowledge. You see these bigger spots. They are roughly the size of a dime, perhaps a nickel. That indicates droplets falling freely due to gravity. Picture this. Imagine you are at home and suddenly receive a spontaneous bloody nose. Many of us have experienced that. I certainly have. You stand over the sink, maybe look down, and you see the blood land. Those are large passive drops caused by gravity. There is no force projecting them outward. They are simply dropping straight down. You see those large spots, but mixed in between them are tiny specks of mist, which suggests expiration. While discussing this, Joseph mentioned a case that many remember, especially in Arizona, the Jodi Arias trial. That situation is obviously quite distinct from the circumstances surrounding Nancy Guthrie. Here's why the blood evidence sparked that memory. Jodi Arias stabbed her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander dozens of times and shot him in the head in 2008 inside a home in Mesa, Arizona. Alexander was showering when the attack began. Arias is now spending the rest of her life in prison for what she did to him. Despite the differences, the video of the blood on Nancy's steps brought the area's investigation to Joseph's mind. I mentioned this name to you earlier. If you review the murder of Travis Alexander, which we know Jodi Arias committed, take a close look at the crime scene photos from the bathroom after the stabbing. I've always believed he moved to the sink, leaned on it, and looked into the mirror. You see the gravity-fed drops, but also expirated blood, meaning he was coughing it out or it came from his airway. You have air forcing the liquid out. It is a similar mechanism here. I am not claiming she suffered the exact same injury. My point is, even a punch to the face or mouth causes bleeding in those areas, and the natural reaction is to cough. If you see those tiny droplets, I believe that is expirated blood. Aspiration is breathing in, while expiration is breathing out. In this scene, you see that projected mist alongside the passive falling drops. It creates a specific narrative and isolates the event there. My major question, and I am sure your sharp audience is wondering this too, is about the rest of the house. I want to know what other evidence was deposited inside the structure. Did this happen because she answered the door, or was she being forcibly removed from the home? Let's break down that dynamic, because we are dealing with two distinct actions happening simultaneously here. I believe investigating that specific angle will be crucial moving forward. Once again, this is a completely different scenario. I really cannot emphasize that point enough. Regarding the evidence, it helps to contrast what an expert like Joseph perceives versus what the untrained eye might miss when viewing these video fragments. Of course, we all remain hopeful and continue praying that Nancy Guthrie is still with us. Ever since those images of the masked individual on Nancy Guthrie's front steps were released, the Pima County Sheriff's Department has been flooded with tens of thousands of tips. While public assistance is fantastic and law enforcement continues to encourage it, the FBI also issued a request yesterday urging more people to utilize their hotline and visit tips.fbi.gov. The number to dial if you have information is 1-800-CALL-FBI. However, the sheer volume of incoming tips means that a significant number of them inevitably turn out to be dead ends. I am not referring to legitimate leads that simply lead nowhere. According to Arizona authorities, the real issue arises when people call in to share personal theories or opinions rather than facts. Here is exactly what the 911 dispatch manager for Pima County shared with KOLD-TV. She explained that callers often speculate on whether the suspect is right or left-handed, or even their gender. Since they receive countless calls repeating these same theories, those are precisely the types of calls they need to avoid. Cecilia Ochoa, the 911 dispatch manager, is urging members of the public to ask themselves a few critical questions before deciding to pick up that phone. They are specifically asking that you only use those public numbers if you genuinely believe you have concrete information regarding who abducted Nancy Guthrie or her current whereabouts. The Pima County Sheriff stated in their latest update that lab analysis is still ongoing regarding biological evidence, specifically DNA, recovered from the Guthrie residence. To clarify, this does not represent new evidence, but rather material that was previously collected from the property. Officials have noted that no further details will be released at this moment. As we head into the weekend, we are watching closely to see if additional individuals will be detained in connection with this case. The sheriff indicated that such activity is to be expected as the investigation proceeds. So far, roughly 2 or 3 individuals have been detained and questioned during the execution of search warrants, though it is important to note that no formal arrests have been made. You likely recall the man detained last week during an operation involving a raid on a home 2 miles from Guthrie's house, followed by a traffic stop on a Range Rover near a local Culver's restaurant. That individual has retained legal counsel. He reportedly resides in that home with his 77-year-old mother. Through his attorney, he denies any knowledge of Nancy Guthrie or her disappearance. It is crucial to note that law enforcement has not yet cleared him as a suspect, unlike the members of the Guthrie family and their spouses who have been ruled out. Law enforcement officials also state that they are continuing to process evidence seized during the raid and items obtained from the home and traffic stop under a federal court order. Joining us now to discuss the case and potential next steps is the professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University and host of the YouTube show Body Bags, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, It is always a pleasure to have you on Law and Crime, and you are the perfect person to ask because yesterday felt like the quietest day since this story broke. That silence usually implies a couple of different possibilities. It could mean investigators are closing in, or it could suggest they have hit a wall. That is exactly why I want to discuss the forensic science aspects we have been hearing so much about. Just reading the room right now, nearly 3 weeks after Nancy Guthrie was taken, where do you believe this investigation actually stands? Forget the locals, keep your eyes on the feds. That is my advice. The federal agents operate in their own bubble, and as you can clearly see, they do not leak information. I try to avoid sensationalism whenever possible. You really just have to focus on the federal agents and watch their movements closely. Look at what they have in their possession, because their resources far exceed anything a local sheriff's department can muster. We simply might not hear any updates for quite some time. You are absolutely right about the silence, Chris, because sometimes you just have to cut through the noise. Lord knows there has been a massive amount of static surrounding this case, perhaps more than I have seen in all my years. Even when comparing this to the Idaho murders or Gabby Petito, those benchmark cases we all know, I do not recall a tempo quite like this. I really don't. And naturally, it all centers around who Mrs. Guthrie's daughter is to a large extent, because I cover missing persons cases constantly, and none of them gain the traction that this one has. Consequently, the entire world is watching. Massive resources are being poured into this, not only by law enforcement, but by the media as well. The story has simply captured the public imagination. It certainly has, and the scene is fascinating because you have such intense media attention regularly visiting Nancy Guthrie's home or her daughter's place where she stayed previously, giving us glimpses of investigators arriving or the FBI canvassing specific areas. Honestly, I suspect we are only privy to about 5% of what is actually happening behind the scenes, perhaps a fraction more, but there is undoubtedly a vast amount of information we remain in the dark about. There is a lot of discussion about genetic genealogy, and I find it fascinating how it has cracked some of these major cold cases. Most people are familiar with the Brian Kohberger situation and the Golden State Killer. For me, it is just mind-boggling. Could you walk us through the process, especially for someone like me who was terrible at biology and ended up in broadcasting instead of your field? How exactly does it work? How do you get from a biological sample to actually identifying a suspect through a family tree based on DNA found inside that home? You know, when I reflect back on my time as a young investigator, I could not have even begun to fathom the technological depths we have reached today compared to what we had then. I look at my colleagues, whom I'm proud to call friends, David and Kristen Middleman over at Othram Labs. I have personally witnessed their work, and I know that it takes a brilliant mind like David Middleman's to achieve these results. It almost feels like they are conjuring magic, doesn't it? It is as if you are literally taking raw data and creating something tangible. You are essentially breathing life into the evidence. With investigative genetic genealogy, what you are fundamentally doing is taking a physical sample and constructing a comprehensive genetic profile. That covers the biological side of the equation. You end up with a genetic profile containing multiple markers. I believe David usually requires around 24 of these specific markers along the strand to identify what makes a person unique. If we back up for a moment, there is a specific phase of DNA analysis that you enter before you even reach the level of forensic genetic genealogy. You have to consider phenotyping, a concept that has generated a significant amount of discussion recently. Phenotyping involves science so fine-tuned that a single profile can provide a snapshot of hair color, eye color, height, and weight, along with geomarkers indicating where that person likely originated. Sink your teeth into this concept for a moment. Imagine you have an unidentified suspect. If investigators use phenotyping, they can group those genetic traits and generate a physical profile. This predicts what the suspect likely looks like based on their genetics. If standard database searches fail, you take that profile and move the investigation to the next level. If you visit Othram in the Woodlands, Texas, just north of Houston, you will see a campus that looks like it belongs in the future. The facility is absolutely incredible. I have always referred to David Middleman as the Elon Musk of DNA. It is just the way his mind operates. The guy is amazing. They employ not just biologists, but an entire division of genealogists. They take that genetic profile and map the connections against anyone who has uploaded their DNA to public databases. Now, we must clarify that this does not involve the 23andMe crowd, okay? We are talking about open source genealogy sites where users opt in to share their family trees. Some people think that limits the scope, but honestly, it is not limiting at all. Simply because you lack access to the 23andMe database does not mean you are stuck. It would be great to have, sure. Since you are working within an exponential mathematical space, building out the family tree connects the perpetrator to the event almost inevitably. Let me put it this way. You might find connections with distant relatives, perhaps a 6th, 7th, or 8th cousin. Then you work backwards to bring the suspect into genealogical focus. Combine that genealogy with the biological profile you created, and you have a massively powerful tool. Allow me a moment to explain the context here. Early in my career, if we found a blood sample at a crime scene, we relied heavily on blood typing. Blood types are crucial for things like blood banking and safety. You need a matching blood type for medical procedures. The rarest blood type globally is AB negative, though the specific statistics fluctuate. That type appears in roughly 1 out of every 169 people. Now, compare that probability to the Koberger case. Exactly. 1 in 3 octillion. That statistic completely reframes the conversation. We are moving at light speed now, and the technology only gets sharper. I must add a caveat regarding Koberger, though I hate saying his name. It burns like acid in my mouth. Sure. There has always been speculation around the campfire that the FBI might have accessed closed consumer databases, like accessing 23andMe records directly. I cannot confirm that, and I know internal memos exist that prohibit such actions. Allegations exist that it happened, but look at other successes like the Rachel Morin case. Othram got involved there, and the suspect was a Salvador national whom they successfully identified. Okay, that story stood out to me, just like this one, because the suspect had no prior record in the United States. He was wanted for murder in El Salvador, but had no U.S. Arrest record, so he was not in CODIS. Yet this technology tracked him from a Maryland crime scene all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma. You are absolutely right, Chris. It is actually terrifying for those of us who value our personal privacy like a warm blanket. However, if your genetic information exists in any public bank, the potential remains for creating a profile that nails you. We have seen the proof, most famously with the Golden State Killer investigation. That case dragged on for years and years. Now look at what Othram has achieved with their current involvement. You hear about their work on homicide cases, but their major claim to fame is trying to clear the NamUs database. It contains over 30 entries. This hits close to home for me due to my background in the coroner's office. I have seen countless unidentified bodies in my career, many of whom I had to bury without names. I cannot praise David enough. He might be the world's leading altruist because his goal is to clear every name off the NamUs list, and they have already solved hundreds. That is the power of this tool. I call it conjuring, bringing the dead back to life from just a bone fragment. They extract degraded DNA, build a profile, and find descendants. I covered a fascinating case on body bags recently. A woman fell down a well in Canada shortly after World War I, and her remains were eventually discovered. Authorities kept the remains for decades until a great-great-granddaughter received a call asking if she had a missing distant relative, like a grandmother. She confirmed it, and it turned out to be her grandmother. They finally identified the lady. When you consider all those old remains, it brings us to modern cases where the DNA is fresh and not degraded. It has not been sitting on a shelf in a medical examiner's office or buried in a tomb. We are dealing with a fresh sample now. If you want to put the pedal to the metal on an investigation, they have the capability. With the Guthrie case, that is why we have been so frustrated while trying to identify the unknown perpetrator. This is not usually your first option. It is not step one. Typically, you send the sample to Florida first, right? That was my question. How does it work if the DNA source is unknown? If there was a large pool of blood, do you have enough sample to test? Is it digitized? Can you send the same sample to Florida and then to the genetic genealogy lab without using it all up? I am glad you asked that I have been discussing this issue because similar cases have arisen. Look at the JonBenet Ramsey case. Think about how many people handled the evidence and potentially cross-contaminated it. If the sample was utilized previously, are you burning through your supply? I suspect the Florida lab likely processed it first. They generate a profile, send it digitally to CODIS, and then that genetic map is cross-referenced in their database. Oh, absolutely. I believe that's entirely feasible. Everything really hinges on the facility's baseline protocols. It's possible the feds insisted on testing the evidence themselves, only to get overruled by the local sheriff who preferred sticking with his usual contacts down in Florida. They likely have a standing contract and refuse the Bureau's help. It's a real shame, honestly, considering Othram and the FBI usually work hand in glove on these things. Othram is the heavy hitter here simply because the Bureau's tech lags behind when it comes to advanced investigative genetic genealogy. Since they're already partnered up, it streamlines the whole process. You get the idea? Once they give the green light on that phase, you move forward. Then you tackle the next step. Plus, you have to lock down the chain of custody. How many people are actually touching the evidence? Every time that sample changes hands, the liability skyrockets and accountability becomes a nightmare. Regarding those cases where they pinpoint a distant relative, say a third or fourth cousin, and use that branch of the family tree to hunt down the actual perpetrator. Does that evidence actually hold water before a judge? Hypothetically, in the Guthrie investigation, and obviously we don't know the outcome yet, imagine they get a break because a fifth cousin popped up in the database across the country. What's the play then? Once you have a name, do you need his specific biology, or can you move to arrest and charge the suspect based solely on the genetic link to that distant family member? Absolutely not. That would be reckless. That's where the garbage grabs come into play, waiting for a suspect to toss a cup. It's similar to the strategy used in the Hoyerman trial that's finally on the docket. Right. That was the whole pizza crust situation, wasn't it? Everyone discussed that endlessly. Since it was trash, it was fair game, but they still had to loop back and secure a confirmatory swab to be sure. Genetic genealogy just acts as a compass. It orients the investigation. Once you start pulling those threads, it shows you exactly where to focus your resources. It gives detectives a target, but then they need a strategy. How do they acquire the suspect's DNA without tipping him off? There are generally two methods. They usually dig through his garbage or set up surveillance. We've seen cases where they tail a guy until he drops a soda straw, then swoop in to grab it. They test that item, or if the case is solid enough, they might just approach him directly and ask for a voluntary cheek swab. Alternatively, they could secure a warrant and force the issue legally. You absolutely need scientific verification. It doesn't matter if it's industrial chemistry or medical research. Confirmatory testing is non-negotiable. Forensics operates under the same rules. You must verify the findings. The stakes are infinitely higher here because a courtroom showdown is inevitable. One misstep could torpedo the entire prosecution before it starts. We've still got miles to go on this one. We were chatting off air about the blood patterns. I'm curious how you'd classify the droplets visible on the front porch of the Guthrie residence. That News Nation clip showed them right on the doorstep. The real question is what caused that stain and what story does it tell us? What's your professional take? I spotted it immediately, hat tip to Brian, since I believe he's the one who captured that footage, right? But seriously, how on earth did Brian get that close? I'm not knocking him. He's a reporter doing his job. He's just hustling. But why was the scene accessible? Oh, right, they pulled the yellow tape. It was completely unsecured. Let that reality sink in for a moment. Brian was just working. I know people have thrown shade, asking what business he had being there. I'll tell you, he was being a journalist. Simple as that. So the police had cleared the scene. He didn't send me the photos personally. I saw them in his report. And looking at those stills, my gut screamed expirated blood. Let me explain. If you see those heavy drops, don't just take my word for it. Look it up yourself. You'll see what I mean. They are roughly the size of a dime or a nickel. That indicates free-falling blood, driven purely by gravity. Picture this. You're standing in your kitchen and your nose starts bleeding. Most of us have been there. You lean over the sink or rush to the bathroom and look down. There they are, big, heavy drips hitting the porcelain. There's no force behind it, no spray. It's just falling straight down. You see those heavy drops, but mixed in between them is a fine mist. That suggests expirated blood. I brought this up earlier. Remember the Travis Alexander murder? We know Jodi Arias killed him. Go review the crime scene photos of the bathroom after the stabbing. I've always believed he braced himself against the sink, looking in the mirror. You see the gravity drips, but also the expirated spray, meaning he was coughing blood from his airway. It's the Air Force projecting the blood outward. It's the same principle here, though I'm not claiming she suffered that exact injury. My point is, a punch to the nose or mouth fills those cavities with blood, causing a cough reflex. That fine mist, that's aspirated blood. Aspirated is breathing in, expirated is blowing out. That mist is mixed right in with the gravity drops. It paints a very specific picture in that spot. My burning question, and I'm sure your sharp listeners are wondering this too, is what other evidence was left inside the house? Did this happen when she answered the door or when she was being forced out? The dynamic changes completely because those are two distinct scenarios. Exploring that difference is key, and I hope the police documented it thoroughly. But again, it all comes back to Brian's footage and the fact that he was able to film it at all. Since there wasn't any caution tape aimed at restricting access, the guy basically just marched right up to the front door, didn't he? That massive oversight remains one of the primary complaints regarding the initial response during those critical early hours. We are all holding on to hope for a miracle and telling ourselves there is plenty of evidence we just haven't seen yet. But you have to ask yourself, are we really approaching day 19? How drastically does a fumble like that extend the timeline of an inquiry simply because protocols were ignored during the first 48 hours? Absolutely, the success or failure of your entire investigation is often determined in those fleeting initial minutes. I constantly remind the undergraduates I instruct at Jacksonville State that you only get one single opportunity to breach the perimeter of a crime scene untouched. You must be ready. Whether you are working forensics, handling the tech, or serving as lead detective, every ounce of your concentration must be dialed in at that specific instant. Given the microscopic trace evidence we rely on today, and we discussed this earlier, Chris, I liken it to entering a sterile operating theater. You have to be mentally distinct and physically suited up, fully aware of exactly how you intend to process the environment before stepping inside. There are absolutely no second takes. Attorneys love to say you can't unring a bell. And once that contamination occurs, you can never get that purity back. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and I realize I sound pessimistic, but when I combine the facts with the footage Brian showed us, I keep replaying those first days. It is surreal that we are still discussing this situation so much later. Look at the septic tank search and how casually that procedure was conducted. Nobody was suited up in protective Tyvek gear, and I didn't see a single person wearing latex gloves or protective booties on their feet. There is a whole laundry list of procedural errors we could critique, though I genuinely want to stay optimistic for Mrs. Guthrie's family. My mind keeps drifting to her current condition, and I know I'm not alone in that worry, because while I can lecture on forensic protocols all day, the clock is ticking. Exactly, seconds are the most valuable currency we have right now. As a detective, you must operate like time is your scarcest resource, right from the jump, and every blunder forces you to squander that irreplaceable asset. We will have to wait and see how this tragedy unfolds as we enter week 3 since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her residence. That was Joseph Scott Morgan, host of the Body Bags podcast, available right here on YouTube. Always a pleasure to have your scientific expertise on law and crime. Take care, Chris. Meanwhile, the cash incentive for anyone holding the key to this mystery has gone up significantly. The FBI has posted a $100,000 bounty, and now Crime Stoppers is matching that with another $100,000 thanks to a Wisconsin attorney. That brings the total to approximately $200,000 for any lead that cracks this investigation wide open. If you know anything about Nancy Guthrie, and we need solid facts rather than speculation, please dial the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900 or reach the FBI at 1-800-225-5324 or online at tips.fbi.gov. That wraps up this edition of On the Case, brought to you by Law and Crime. Please hit subscribe on Spotify and YouTube or catch our stream on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. See you soon. Are detectives anywhere near solving the mystery of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance? It seems the updates from police are drying up, even as thousands of tips from the public continue to pour in. We are essentially left relying on the few clues we actually know about, such as the masked figure on her porch and the mystery DNA found indoors that does not match her family, or her close friends. On top of that, there is the blood discovered on her front entryway, which police have confirmed matches Nancy herself. Coming up, we will dive into what expert analysis reveals about those bloodstains that might escape a normal glance. This is On the Case, presented by Law and Crime, and I am your host, Chris Stewart. Hello, everyone. We really appreciate you tuning in to follow this story. We can deliver this coverage thanks to our amazing partner, Morgan & Morgan. There is a solid reason why this program is a leading true crime show on YouTube. Similarly, there's a reason Morgan & Morgan stands as the largest injury law firm in America. They have spent over 35 years fighting for everyday people, recovering over $30 billion for their clients.